After a period of calm, Trump is back to threatening Iran. If there is no deal with Iran, we will finish the job, the President of the United States announced. Crowds in Tehran are saying their final goodbye to Khamenei, and Iran's president declares Israel is responsible for all the crimes in the region. Russia announced that it will return its experts to the nuclear power plant in Bushehr, Iran, and could Israeli technology end up in Erdogan's hands? Concern in Israel ahead of the NATO summit in Ankara, Netanyahu called on the United States not to sell F-35 fighter jets to Turkey and warned against a regime infected by the Muslim Brotherhood. We'll bring you all the details shortly about the blocking battle being led by Prime Minister Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, who is sending a clear message to Washington: do not give Turkey F-35 fighter jets. And on the southern front, the Hamas terrorist organization announced the dismantling of its government in Gaza, but its people remain in positions of power. The world is not impressed by Hamas's declaration that it is dismantling itself, and it is not satisfied with cosmetic steps. I'm Mati Shoshani. Tonight, Yair Pinto found himself a little peace in a remote forest, resting in a small cabin with no electricity. But don't worry, next week he'll be back, and then it'll be my turn for a vacation. We are boots on the ground, bringing you the whole truth about what is happening in Israel, and also the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Today is July the 7th. Let's begin. After a period of moderate messages and efforts to reach an arrangement, United States President Donald Trump is returning to the language of threats towards Iran. Trump praised the performance of the United States in the war, claiming that Tehran's army was destroyed, and warned that if Iran does not meet its commitments, Washington could severely damage its energy infrastructure. This is happening at the same time as the funeral procession for Iran's leader, Ali Khamenei. The procession continued today in Iran and turned into an extreme display of hatred. Participants waved incitement signs calling for the elimination of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and United States President Donald Trump, alongside a doll in Trump's likeness that was hanged from a rope. 1 second, I want to pause for a moment on the level of extremism in this display, so we understand exactly what is happening there. Along the funeral route, giant signs were hung under the title "Wanted." The signs showed illustrations of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Donald Trump, with a red target marked on each of their foreheads. These signs included, in Persian and English, an explicit threat: whoever eliminates the two, like dogs, will receive a prize of 100 plots of land, each one covering 200 square meters. At the bottom of the sign, 2 coffins were illustrated, wrapped in the flags of Israel and the United States, alongside the words, "Soon." Now look, Iran is setting red lines ahead of the continuation of contacts with Washington, and among those lines, stopping the fighting in Lebanon, preserving its position in the Strait of Hormuz, and growing difficulty in ignoring the public pressure inside Iran to avenge the elimination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The security tension between Iran, Israel, and the United States continues, and all sides are preparing for the possibility of another escalation. In Tehran, declaring that the ceasefire period is being used to rebuild and upgrade military capabilities. In Israel, they're making clear that the possibility of renewed fighting is still on the table. And at the same time, in the United States, the reduction of forces in the Middle East continues against the backdrop of growing opposition among the American public to yet another war with Iran. The spokesman for Iran's military declared, against the backdrop of Ali Khamenei's funeral procession, that the armed forces of the Islamic Republic are using the ceasefire period to increase operational readiness and strengthen fighting capabilities. According to him, in Tehran they're not wasting a single moment in preparing for a possible confrontation. While all of this is happening, the President of the United States may arrive at the NATO summit in Turkey with a gift for Erdogan, a gift that could put the Turks back on track to purchase the advanced stealth fighter jets. Earlier this week, 2 interviews with our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, were published on Fox News, and it appears they are part of the diplomatic battle taking place in real time, just before a meeting that could affect the balance of power in the region. Netanyahu chose to fight this battle on screen, knowing full well that Trump is listening. In an interview with Fox News, Israeli Prime Minister warned this would violate the balance of power in the Middle East, which is based on Israel's air superiority. The Prime Minister added that Turkey is ruled by a man who openly calls for destruction of Israel. We'll bring you all the details shortly about the opening of the NATO summit in Ankara and about the Israeli effort to prevent Turkey from receiving F-35s. By the way, in recent days, aircraft from the Greek Air Force took part in aerial refueling exercises over the island of Crete. The Greek Air Force does not have refueling aircraft of its own, and the cooperation with Israel gives it a new ability to operate in the region. This is also send a strong message to Turkey. Israel is present in the arena, and it has partners in the Eastern Mediterranean as well. And is Hamas really giving up control of the Gaza Strip? Or is this another public relations exercise? Following yesterday's dramatic announcement about the dismantling of the emergency committee, the Peace Council is making clear the terrorist organization will be required to make very painful concessions. Hamas claimed today in an official statement that it is dismantling the emergency committee that manages the Strip. But the Peace Council is quickly cooling the celebration and reminding everyone that the story is far from over. Hamas's declaration about the resignation of Mohammed Abd al-Khaled el-Farah, head of the Government Emergency Council or Committee in Gaza, and about the complete dismantling of the committee did not pass quietly into the international arena. The Peace Council, the international body overseeing the implementation of the United States President 20-point plan, responded to the announcement and said the following: a real transfer of authority must allow the international community to carry out its mandate independently, including making the administrative and governmental decisions entrusted to it. We'll bring you all the details in just a bit. And by the way, yesterday, thankfully, the commander of the Nukhba training for October 7th massacre was eliminated. The IDF eliminated the terrorist, and today the world is a slightly better place. We'll bring you all the details on that issue in just a few minutes. So there's a lot ahead of us. Let's dive into the details. I'm Mati Shoshani, and Yael Pinto's on a short vacation. We are boots on the ground, bringing you the whole truth about what is happening in Israel and about the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. In a second before we begin, I want to call on you to continue spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click the subscribe button. Most importantly, don't forget to look for me, Mati Shoshani, and Yael Pinto on social media to get a view through our eyes of what it's like to live in Israel under war. Now guys, we spend a lot of time here talking about what's happening in Israel and around the world, and how quickly the global landscape can change. And while those conversations are often geopolitical, they also raise practical questions, especially when it comes to financial stability. With ongoing uncertainty, inflation, and rising debt levels, more people are asking, how do I better protect what I've built? That's where diversification comes into the conversation. And for many, that includes physical gold and silver. You see, preserved gold helps Americans explore how precious metals can play a role in long-term retirement planning, including IRAs and 401ks. And right now, you can get their free wealth protection guide by texting TBN Silver to 50505. Plus, with a qualified purchase, you could receive up to $15,000 in free gold or silver. If you want to learn how the precious metals could help protect your savings, call 855-523-1030 or text TBN Silver to 50505 today to receive your free wealth protection guide. Let's get back to the news. In the Oval Office in Washington, President Trump took the gloves off against Iran. His message was simple: either an agreement or the United States will finish the mission. While the American president is talking about a deal, crowds are marching through the streets of Tehran in a funeral procession that has turned from a national mourning event into a display of revenge against Israel and the United States. So the question now is not only whether there will be an agreement, the question is, who's really controlling this moment? Is it Washington, which is threatening, or Tehran, which is trying to turn the funeral into leverage over the entire Middle East? Trump made clear that he's not seeking to topple the regime in Iran. He said that he prefers an agreement because he does not want to harm tens of millions of Iranian civilians. But in the same breath, he threatened to strike Iran's energy infrastructure, to shut down power plants, to paralyze the electricity supply, and to prove to Tehran that American military power is still very much on the table. He also returned to the core point. From his perspective, Iran must not be allowed to have nuclear weapons or the means to reach them. And this is exactly where the major gap lies. Because in the White House, they're talking about enriched uranium, about nuclear facilities, inspections, and a final agreement. But in Iran, they're talking about leverage and revenge, about Lebanon, the Strait of Hormuz, and the regime's need not to appear as if it surrendered after the elimination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. During the funeral procession of the Supreme Leader, the chants against Trump and against Netanyahu were not just slogans. Along the route, signs were hung with explicit threats, illustrations of the leaders of Israel and the United States, red targets on their foreheads, and coffins wrapped in the flags of Israel and the United States. This is not national grief. This is a political performance by a regime trying to signal outwardly, we may have been hit, but we have not been broken. Now, at the same time, the spokesman for Iran's military, Mohammad Akrami Nia, said that the armed forces are using this period of calm to improve their combat capabilities. The meaning is clear. A ceasefire, from Tehran's point of view, is not necessarily a pause. It can be time to repair, to conceal, time to refill stockpiles, and time to prepare for the next round. In Israel, they hear this very clearly. Defense Minister Israel Katz said sharply that Khamenei was eliminated because he led the plan to destroy Israel, and added that any Iranian leader who tries to advance a similar plan will also be eliminated. This is not a statement made in a vacuum. It is being said while negotiations are underway, but also while Iran is trying to restore its deterrence. And this is where the Strait of Hormuz enters the picture. Iran does not see the strait only as a maritime route. It sees it as a strategic lever. Ships, oil, maritime insurance, energy prices, and pressure on governments in the West all pass through this narrow choke point. That is why Tehran insists that security in the strait be managed by the countries on the region, mainly by Iran and Oman, and not by Western forces. Now, the UK and France have already signaled willingness to take part in an international mission to protect freedom of navigation. In Tehran, they see this as an attempt to take away one of their most important bargaining chips. The command of Iran's armed forces even warned that any violation of Iranian sovereignty in the strait would be met with a firm response. In other words, while Trump says deal or mission, Iran says not without Hormuz and not without Lebanon. Tehran is also placing southern Lebanon inside the equation. During the funeral ceremonies, an official Lebanese delegation arrived in the Iranian capital, led by Defense Minister Michel Mansa. The Iranians present this as part of a broader coordination, and emphasize that any future arrangement must include an end to the fighting in Lebanon and a full Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon. This is important to understand. Iran is trying to pull the talks away from the narrow nuclear question and into its entire map of influence in the region. The nuclear, Lebanon, Hormuz, frozen assets, sanctions, economic recovery, and revenge, all of it enters the same deal. And meanwhile, Russia is reminding everyone that it is still in the game. Moscow announced that if the situation remains calm, Russian nuclear experts will return to the Bushal nuclear power plant in mid-July. Rosatom had already evacuated hundreds of workers at the beginning of the war, and are now talking about a gradual return to routine. Now, this sounds technical, but it's not only technical. Bushal is a symbol of nuclear cooperation between Russia and Iran. When the Russians return there, they're signaling to Tehran that they have not disappeared. They're signaling to Washington that there is a limit to how much Iran can be isolated without also calculating Moscow. China is also in the background. Tehran may want to return the oil to the oil market, but the market is no longer waiting for it in the same way. Chinese demands for oil have weakened, imports into China have declined, and the Chinese imports of oil have also been cut significantly. Now, at the same time, global supply is rising. OPEC plus countries are increasing production, Russia continues to export, and Iran itself has already managed to move tens of millions of barrels since the removal of the naval blockade. This creates a quiet Iranian problem. Even if the agreement opens the door, and even if sanctions are softened, Iran is not returning to an empty market. It is returning to a crowded and competitive market with customers who are less hungry and with prices that may not give it the economic oxygen it wants. Now, what you see on YouTube is only part of the story. Get closer to first-hand reports, behind-the-scenes moments, and stories of faith, resilience, and hope from Israel. Visit www.tbn.org/journeys/boots or text BOOTS to 316-316 for direct updates from TBN Israel. With me, Mati Shoshani, and Yael reporting directly from Israel, you're not just watching the news, you're witnessing what's happening on the ground. TBN Israel brings honest, first-hand coverage from the ground in Israel to viewers around the world. In partnership with TBN, we share what's really happening through a Christian Judeo perspective, rooted in truth, in faith, and the people living it every day. Your support helps deliver on-the-ground reporting, real stories of resilience and hope, and trusted coverage that connects the faith world to Israel. In the Palestinian arena, Hamas is trying to play a similar game. The organization announced the dismantling of the emergency committee that managed the Gaza Strip and the opening of the way for the National Committee to manage the Strip. Now, on paper, this sounds like a transfer of power, but on the ground, the story is far more complicated. The ministry staff remain in their positions. The mechanisms do not disappear. The real question is whether Hamas is handing over authority or merely replacing the sign on the door. The Peace Council made clear that the test will be practical, not declarative. The principle it's setting is very clear. One authority, one law, one weapon. In other words, no shadow government, no militias, no armed mechanisms operating behind a civilian committee. If the National Committee is supposed to govern Gaza, it needs to govern for real. In Israel, this move is being viewed with deep suspicion. An Israeli official has already defined it as a meaningless spin as long as Hamas's people remain in positions of power. Now, at the same time, the IDF continues to remove threats on the ground. In the northern Gaza Strip, Fadi Fala Ashul Dagamesh was eliminated, a commander in the training department of Hamas's military wing. And in the years before the October 7th massacre, he led training for the Nukhba force. During the war, he was involved in managing combat against IDF forces, and in recent days he had been working to advance additional terror plans and rebuild Hamas's capabilities. This is exactly the gap between political declarations and operational reality. Hamas says it is dismantling. The IDF meets commanders on the ground who are trying to rebuild terrorist capabilities. Now, at the same time, IDF forces destroyed underground routes totaling more than 1 kilometer long, as well as 4 launch positions that were built after the ceasefire came into effect. Those positions were not built for a museum. They were ready to launch towards IDF forces and Israeli civilians. Now, in a completely different arena, but one connected to the same regional power picture, the battle over the F-35 fighter jets is underway. Netanyahu warned Trump not to return Turkey to the path of purchasing the stealth aircraft. He said that such a sale would damage the balance of power in the Middle East, which is based on Israel's air superiority. Turkey was removed from the F-35 program after it purchased S-400 systems from Russia, over concerns that Moscow could learn about the capabilities of the advanced American aircraft through that system. Now, on the eve of the NATO summit in Ankara, the fear in Israel is that Trump may arrive with a strategic gift for Erdogan. This is not only about an aircraft. It's about technology, penetration capability, regional status, and the question of who receives the power to change the skies over the Middle East. That's exactly why the joint air exercise between Israel and Greece over Crete is so important. An Israeli refueling aircraft practiced aerial refueling with Greek F-16 fighter jets. Greece does not have its own refueling fleet, and cooperation with Israel gives it the ability to operate farther away, remain in the air for longer, and expand its range of action in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is quite a message, but a clear message. Israel is not looking only eastward towards Iran. It is also looking westward towards the Mediterranean, towards Turkey, towards Greece, and towards the question of who is building alliances while the regional map is changing. And so in one day, all the arenas connect. Iran threatens and negotiates, Russia returns to Bushehr. Hamas declares that it is handing over power, but its people remain inside the mechanisms. The IDF continues to strike commanders and infrastructure, and Turkey is trying to return to the F-35 game, while Israel is trying to block it before it's too late. This is not a real period of quiet. This is a period in which every side is using the pause to improve its position before the next decision. And if the agreement does not close the nuclear file, Hormuz, Lebanon, and Gaza, is the Middle East heading towards calm or only towards the next round? Guys, keep spreading the truth. Follow us, and most importantly, don't forget to click the subscribe button so that you stay tuned into the truth in real time and never miss boots on the ground. Keep looking for me, Mati Shoshani, and Yael Pinto on social media to see life in Israel through our eyes. And now, as always, I want to remind you to pray for the people of Israel. And I want to say you need to do something greater than that. I want to call on you and challenge you today to be praying on a regular basis for your government, whatever country it is, for my government, the government of Israel, and for the replacement of the evil regimes in the Middle East, to replace the Ayatollahs and the IRGC in Iran, to replace the government or remove Hezbollah from Lebanon, and to replace the evil government inside of the Gaza Strip. And as always, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, the soldiers, men and women in arms in Israel, and the U.S. soldiers based in this region. And as always, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And if you're in doubt, just pray for God's will to be done as we're taught on earth as it is in heaven.